So it's almost been a year now since I originally purchased my Mamiya RB67 Pro SD, and also since I posted up my original review just talking about my first impressions using this camera, coming from someone who is very comfortable and very familiar working with a Pentax 672. So since then, I've spent quite a bit of time shooting with this camera and getting used to it. At the start of the year, I did a 10-day trip out to California, just working on a current portfolio of mine. And I brought this camera along and used it on a day-to-day basis, which really just helped me get an understanding of what I liked about it and also what I didn't like about it. That's really important for me when I'm doing a proper camera review, is just having a camera kit for an extended period of time so I can really figure out if it's for me or not. So I will mention that currently the RB is the only 6x7 camera that I own, obviously replacing the Pentax. And because of that, in this video I want to talk about the things I love about the Mamiya, as well as some of the things that I don't like about it, and then obviously why I chose to keep this camera instead of the Pentax setup. One of the things that I talked about in my original review was usability, and the fact that the Mamiya for me initially felt more awkward to use than the Pentax. I'll tell you what, like right off the bat, nicer to look through than the Pentax in terms of waist level finder, but yeah, way more awkward to handhold, that's for sure. It really at first seemed best suited to tripod use, but I gotta say, the longer that I've owned this camera and the more that I've used it, it's definitely become more comfortable shooting with it from the waist. Really one of the most appealing things about the whole RB67 system was the amount of accessories that you can buy for this camera. So I figured, since shooting at eye level was kind of the most drastic change for me moving to this system from the Pentax, I figured that was a really good place to start in terms of adding a few things to this camera to see if I could make it a little more comfortable. I ended up adding 2 accessories for handheld shooting. The first is a left-hand grip, and the second is a prism finder. The grip that I purchased is the latest version for the RB67, called the GL701, and I actually haven't seen too many others like this for sale. Obviously it does the same thing as the other left-hand grips, but visually it's just a little bit nicer. Right away, this made a huge difference in terms of how this camera felt to use handheld. It just really gives you this kind of nice point of contact on the left, and then you can use your right hand kind of under the camera body or under the lens here. Whereas before I had the grip installed, it just kind of felt like I was cradling this box, which I just could never really get used to and was never happy with. So I would definitely recommend the addition of a left-hand grip to any RB owners who find the camera a little awkward to use. The prism finder that I added is the Model 2 version, which just means that it's the non-metered version. This is really nice to use from an optics standpoint. It obviously corrects the image and then it makes shooting at eye level a lot more comfortable, but definitely where it falls short is when it comes to the size and the weight. Overall, I like how they both work. It's definitely easier to shoot with this camera, having a nice side grip and then having a prism finder that's also up at eye level. But the downside, and what I'm battling with right now, is that they add a lot of size and weight to a camera that's pretty big to begin with. And not even so much the side handle. The side handle is really nice and doesn't add much weight. And if you leave the waist level finder on, it's still a pretty nice package. But it's this prism finder that is just gigantic in size, and it's also pretty heavy. So overall, with these additions on, the camera is nicer to use, but as you can see, it's getting pretty huge, and as a travel camera, it's definitely not ideal. So I'm definitely going to keep the grip, as I really like that, obviously. And probably will keep the finder as well, just because from an investment standpoint, it's pretty low. And there are times where it is nice to use, but like I mentioned, with both of these items installed, it just, for me and for the way that I work, makes the whole camera package not super fun to use because it's just a little too big. And this is coming from someone who usually really isn't that picky when it comes to camera sizes and weights and things like that. So just a heads up, if you are looking into purchasing the Prism Finder, give it a go and see if it works for you for the style of shooting that you do and the way that you work. Know that it is really nice to use optically, but just be warned that it does transform this camera setup into a pretty large package to use. So the two lenses that I have for this setup, I have the 90 3.5 KL, which I showed in the first review I did on this camera, but I also bought a 65 f4 KL right before this trip. I had the 65 4.5C before, but it had some haze in it, so I wanted to replace it. And it's funny, I still haven't used this camera enough to know if 90mm is going to be a focal length that I'm happy with for most of my work. They're both kind of awkward, where 90 I think is roughly equivalent to like 42 or something like that in 35mm, and then the 65mm is equivalent to like 32 in 35mm, and I really like 35mm, so I kind of have a little bit longer and then a little bit wider, but so far I would say 95% of the work that I've shot on this trip has been with the 90mm, and I'm really enjoying it. So as mentioned, the 65mm is the f4KL version, which was the latest version that Mamiya made. And before this, I had the 65mm-C, which was f4.5. And the only reason that I upgraded to this lens is that the 65mm-C that I had, I purchased off eBay, and when it showed up, I found that it had haze in it. So I used it for a bit, but I just figured if I was gonna replace it, I might as well get the latest version possible. When it comes to any differences or anything that I've noticed, you know, the KL is a little bit of a faster lens, so maybe just a slight bump in viewfinder brightness. Optically, or when it comes to quality, nothing that I've noticed, and I think you'd be pretty hard pressed to see any differences between both this and the C version. Overall, the size and awkwardness, although it's not something that I enjoy, it's definitely something that I can live with. And when I don't have the Prism Finder on and I'm just using this camera with the left-hand grip and the waist level finder, I really am growing to love it as a setup like that. Like I mentioned, I will keep the Prism Finder around, although it definitely won't live on the camera setup at all times. But really, that's kind of the beauty of the RB system, is that you can strip it down or build it up depending on how you want to use it. So after hearing me talk about how I'm not a huge fan of the handling and the ergos for eye level shooting with this camera, you're probably wondering, why did I decide to keep it instead of the Pentax, which I loved? And really, it comes down to one thing, and that's the price difference between both kits. So if someone came to me and said, we'll buy you any camera you want and we'll pay for it, I would probably go and get a Pentax 672 kit, but that's obviously not realistic. So for me, the difference in cost between a full RB kit versus a 672 kit was pretty drastic, to the point where I just decided that it makes sense to keep this camera, as really from an image standpoint and a quality standpoint, they're producing identical results. I know there is the option of going with a older Pentax 6.7 version for quite a bit cheaper than the 6.7 II, but I'd already owned the Mamiya when I had the Pentax, and I just got used to working with it. And like I said, I'm happy with the results I'm getting from it. And a big thing for me is, at the moment right now, I'm just more interested in creating work and less interested in changing camera systems again. Maybe at some point in the future, I'll explore looking into an older model Pentax, but for now, the Mamiya it is. So like I said in the original review, if you're just looking to get started in the world of 6x7 film, I really think that the Mamiya RB is the best value and most economical way to start shooting with a larger negative. It's a camera system that has a very, very popular past, and it's bound to keep pleasing photographers for years to come.